During the darkest years of the Second World War, when fertilizer factories were bombed, supply lines were cut, and governments rationed every ounce of nitrogen, farmers and civilians were forced to grow food without modern inputs. What they discovered during those years quietly outperformed compost piles, chemical fertilizers, and even many modern organic methods. It worked so well that post-war agriculture had a problem. This soil technique didn't require companies, patents, or yearly purchases. It restored exhausted land faster than compost and produced heavier yields under stress. Within a decade, it disappeared from textbooks, extension offices, and public training programs. Today, most gardeners have never heard of it. In this episode, we're going to walk through the WWII soil method that rebuilt fertility under siege conditions, why it was sidelined after the war, and how you can still apply it today to grow more food with fewer inputs. Why wartime farmers could not rely on compost or fertilizer alone. By 1942, chemical fertilizer production had been redirected to explosives, and composting at scale was difficult in cities and refugee zones. Farmers needed a soil system that worked fast, regenerated itself, and did not rely on external materials. Compost is valuable, but it requires time, carbon sources, turning, and months of biological processing. Wartime growers didn't have that luxury. They needed living soil that produced immediately and improved with every planting cycle. This necessity forced a return to a much older method that focused not on feeding plants, but on feeding soil structure and soil life directly in place. What the wartime soil trench method actually was. The method most commonly used across Europe and parts of Asia was a deep soil trenching system combined with green biomass burial. Instead of surface composting, farmers dug trenches 1 to 2 feet deep, directly in planting beds. Fresh plant material, weeds, kitchen scraps, straw, leaves, and even shredded paper were packed tightly into these trenches and covered immediately with soil. The key difference was depth and exclusion of oxygen. By burying biomass below the aerobic layer, decomposition occurred slowly, retaining nutrients instead of letting them gas off into the air. This created a nutrient bank underground that released fertility gradually over the entire growing season. Why this method consistently outperformed compost piles. Compost loses nitrogen through heat and exposure. Wartime trench systems avoided this loss entirely. Nutrients were locked below the root zone and only accessed as roots grew downward. The buried organic matter also improved water retention dramatically, which mattered during bombing disruptions and fuel shortages that limited irrigation. Crops grown over these trenches developed deeper roots, stronger stems, and greater drought tolerance. Yields increased not because of higher nutrient inputs, but because soil structure itself was rebuilt. Modern compost feeds the top few inches. This system rebuilt the entire soil profile. So, how did WWII agronomists measure its effectiveness? Well, wartime agricultural records from Britain and Eastern Europe show pretty consistent yield increases of about 20 to 40% in staple crops that were grown over those buried biomass trenches. Root vegetables, interestingly enough, showed the largest gains, followed by grains and brassicas. Even soils that had been, really depleted managed to recover within 2 to 3 seasons, and that was without any imported fertilizer. Another thing, the method naturally suppressed weeds because buried seeds decomposed before they could ever reach the light. This, in turn, reduced labour at a time when manpower was, frankly, very scarce. So, why did this soil method quietly disappear after the war? Well, after 1945, governments started promoting industrial agriculture to help stabilise economies and, absorb all that wartime manufacturing capacity. Fertilizer companies needed predictable markets, and extension services began to standardise methods that relied on purchasable inputs. Deep trenching was, let's face it, labour-intensive, decentralised, and really difficult to monetize. It just didn't fit with mechanised farming models or the chemical sales pipelines. As tractors replaced hand labour, surface applications took the place of soil rebuilding. Over time, the method got labelled as inefficient, old-fashioned or even unnecessary, despite the fact that it had proven results under some of the most extreme conditions. So, how can you apply this method safely and effectively today? Well, to use this system now, just start with a single garden bed. Dig a trench about 18 inches deep and 1 foot wide. Then pack it tightly with fresh green material mixed with dry carbon, like leaves or straw. Make sure to avoid meat or fats. Cover it fully with soil and plant directly above. Water deeply once, just to settle the soil. Over the season, the roots will reach the decomposing layer and, bit by bit, access nutrients gradually. In following years, rotate your trenches to rebuild the entire garden area. This method works especially well in poor, compacted or sandy soils. So, why are modern gardeners rediscovering it under new names? Well, today this system quietly reappears under terms like hugelkultur trenches, anaerobic soil banking, or deep organic layering. The principles, though, they remain identical to wartime practice. What's really changed is the context. Rising fertilizer costs, soil degradation, and climate stress are, forcing a return to resilient methods that work without industrial support. What was once dismissed as outdated is now being rediscovered as essential. So, what does this teach us about forgotten wartime knowledge? WWII agriculture wasn't primitive. It was, in fact, adaptive, efficient, and deeply informed by soil ecology. Farmers back then understood that soil is not just a container for chemicals, but a living system that must be rebuilt from the ground down. The trench method succeeded because it worked with biological processes instead of, overriding them. That lesson remains as relevant now as it was under air raids and ration books. If this kind of forgotten wartime knowledge matters to you, go ahead and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into survival systems history erased from modern practice. Share this episode with anyone serious about growing food without dependence on fragile supply chains. These methods kept families alive once, and honestly, they can do it again.